Hello. So let us start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this 115th Social Science Baha lecture. I am Amar BK. I am an anthropologist and currently serving as chair of Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies Kathmandu Center. I am going to moderate this lecture today. So this lecture series is hosted jointly by Social Science Baha and Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies Kathmandu Center. Social Science Baha needs no introduction. I know you all know about it, but Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies Kathmandu Center is a non-profit, non-governmental organization. We seek to enhance the studies on Nepal and Himalayan region, and also collaborate between scholars working, both Nepali and foreign scholars working on Nepal and Himalayan region. It was registered in 2013, and there was some hiatus for some years, especially during the pandemic time. And now we have a new executive board, and we have continued our work. So this is our second event after the new board was formed. And there is another organization with similar name, Nepal Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies, the USA, which is registered in the USA, and Sienna is executive member of that organization, and the other executive members are also here in the audience, Catherine Rankin and Dinesh Powder. So we, ANHS Kathmandu Center, work closely with ANHS USA. So Sienna is going to give today's lecture on aging, care, and place Himalayan elders in an era of migration. You may have already seen her, the description of the talk, and also her bio, but I also again going to introduce her. Sienna Craig is the Jane and Raphael Bernstein Professor in Asian Studies in the Department of Anthropology at Dartmouth College. She is a medical and cultural anthropologist whose relationships with Himalayan and Tibetan communities spans 3 decades and circles between Asia and North America. Her research focuses on migration and social change, Asian medicines, global health, women's health, and aging. Professor Craig is the author of The Aims of Kinship, Connecting Himalayan Lives Between Nepal and New York, published by University of Washington Press 2020. Another book, Mustang in Black and White, with photographer Kevin Bubrisky, published by Bajra Publication 2018. Another book, Healing Elements, Efficacy and the Social Ecologies of Tibetan Medicines, published by University of California Press 2012. And Horses Like Lightning, a story of passage through the Himalayas, published by Wisdom Publications 2008, among other publications. Professor Craig enjoys writing across genres and has published poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction, flash ethnography, and children's literature in addition to scholarly works. Craig's scholarship has been supported by the National Science Foundation, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, and the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research, among other sources. From 2012 to 2017, she served as co-editor of Himalaya, the journal of the Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies, She is an executive council member of the Association for Nepal and Himalayan Studies (ANHS) and the International Association for Study of Transnational Asian Medicines. So, so the format of today's talk lecture will be like this. So we will be presenting for 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have question answer session for about 30 minutes. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. How about, can I move this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Namaste. Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to see so many dear friends and also collaborators on this project in the room. Although I'm the person sitting up here right now, this project is absolutely a collective effort, and you'll see more about how and why that is, and get to hopefully meet and talk with some of the folks in this room, not just me, who are part of this work. But as Amarji said, this is a project that is looking at the relationship between migration from Himalayan communities, the aging population and how people are being cared for and how families are navigating those dynamics of care, and also thinking about this in a comparative way. So this is very much a collaborative and a comparative project. The funding for this particular research project is coming from the U.S. National Science Foundation, and it's a 3-year grant that just started this year. I'm working very closely with another person who maybe some of you know, and some in the room also work very closely with as well, Jeff Childs. Jeff is at the University of Washington University in St. Louis, and he's a demographer as well as a cultural anthropologist who's been working for many, many years in Nubri, and more recently also in the Tsum Valley in Gorkha. I have had the good fortune of being connected to Mustang for 31 years. I first came to Nepal as a student in 1993 on the SIT program, and it changed my life. It changed the course of the rest of my life. I didn't know that it would do that then, but it did indeed do that. I've been coming back to Mustang since that time, and feel very fortunate that I've been able to watch and participate in social and cultural change over such a long period of time, even though I'm old, but I'm not super old. I'm only 50, right? So 51. So it's been a real pleasure to have this kind of long-term engagement and field work relationship as well. So thank you so much for everybody from Mustang who are old friends who are in the room. It really means the world to me. So this project is taking place in 2 places, both in Mustang and in these parts of Gorkha district. And on the Mustang side, here are some of the folks, again, in the room and on the screen, who are participating in this project. This is absolutely a deeply collective and collaborative effort that spans, again, between Nepal and New York City. People from Mustang have been migrating to New York since the late 1990s. Some of you may know that, others of you may not. So in order to do justice to the questions that this project is trying to ask about migration as it relates to the experience of Himalayan elders, there was really no way to do this project without thinking about the dynamic relationship between Mustang itself and the 2 main parts of Mustang, Badagal and Lo, and the cities, both Kathmandu, principally Kathmandu for this project, but also Pokhara, and New York, or the greater New York area. Folks from Mustang are migrating to other parts of the world as well, but I'm generally in this project focusing on communities that are in New York, again, with many people who are in this room. So why is this research important? I think every single one of us could probably stop and think about our own families, our own lives, and the ways that aging and caring for elders in our family is both a blessing and a burden, a challenge of the modern age. And certainly in a place like Nepal, where out-migration is such a big part both of the social fabric of this country at this point and also the economic fabric of this country, I don't have to tell this audience that these questions of how to continue to maintain social ties, take care of elders, and also live one's own life, find new opportunities, educate a next generation is a complex set of dynamics that involve a lot of complications, difficult decisions, and also a lot of love and care. Nepal is also, what I say here, an exporter of care labor. Again, this audience is familiar with those dynamics. People from many parts of Nepal are spending much of their working lives in other countries taking care of other people, whether that is taking care of young children as nannies, like many young women from Mustang do in places like New York and New Jersey, to being part of a set of elder care networks or home care networks or healthcare providers in other settings. The communities that I work in, as well as communities like Nubri and Tsum, are also undergoing really rapid demographic and socioeconomic transitions. And aging, again, is a part of this. And yet, how each of these communities are experiencing these challenges and possibilities for care of their elders is not uniform across these spaces. You might think that culturally Tibetan communities from places like Nubri and Tsum on the one hand, or places like Upper Mustang or the Badagang region, the Muktinath region, are somehow quite similar. But actually this project is really already showing, even in its early stages, just how different each of these four places are in many ways, in terms of how they're navigating these questions of elder care, but also how they are experiencing dynamics of migration. One of the other important parts of this project is to experiment, to continue to experiment with what it means to co-produce knowledge. Again, I've had the good fortune of working over these many years with a number of wonderful younger scholars, colleagues, community researchers. Again, many of you are in this room. It's very important to me that as we think about these deep social anthropological questions that also have really deep real-life consequences, that the people for whom the stakes are the highest in these dynamics are engaged in the knowledge production and the work that goes into it. So it's not my parents. I have my own parents to deal with and to think about and to care for, but it's not my parents, it's the parents of many of the collaborators in this audience and the family dynamics at the core of those relationships that are also at the core of this research and that allow for a kind of methodological innovation and hopefully sophistication that is exciting to me as an anthropologist. This leads to sort of the second to last bullet point up here, which is that this project and some of the other projects I've had the good fortune of working on recently have allowed, I think, for the cultivation of intergenerational connections that might otherwise occur, but not quite in the same way. And in some cases might not have occurred without the kinds of opportunities that this form of research allows for a younger generation who may have spent much of their schooling outside of a place like Mustang, but who have now come back and are engaging in this work and learning something about their parents and their grandparents' generation that they might not have had the opportunity to sort of think about in a systematic way, even though it might have been sort of around the edges of many family conversations. And so this is also important to me. And then finally, thinking about what the future holds and how to take this qualitative ethnographic research and demographic research and pay it forward into thinking in concrete ways about, if not single-minded solutions, possibilities for caring for and holding the complexity of aging and elder care at this moment when there's so much change going on. So some of the questions that we're asking, the specific questions that we're asking in this project, has to do also with this question of what it means to age successfully. Much of the sociological, anthropological research that has been done on aging, perhaps not surprisingly, has been done in Western countries or in contexts where what it means to have a good life as an older person might be very, very different than what it means for someone from Mustang to have a good life as an older person. And so part of this work is trying to contribute to a much broader sort of set of qualitative and ethnographic questions about what it means to age well. We tend to think, or we tend to prioritize in the West a lot this idea of independence, right? You're aging successfully if you can do everything by yourself. Well, here, although being functional and being able to do things that you want to do is still very much important to the folks that we're working with in this project, a sense of interdependence, perhaps not surprisingly, and family connection also remains really central, perhaps even more central than the idea of maintaining independence. So some of those kinds of dynamics and questions are the things that this work is trying to get at. One of the other things that we're really trying to think carefully about is this idea of aging in place. So again, in a Western context, the notion of aging in place is this idea that an older person or couple get to stay in their own house and age in their own house and be cared for in their own house, or stay, again, independent in the place that they raise their children, to not have to leave, maybe to have care or help in that house, but to stay in their own place. Well, what does that mean when your own place literally is picked up and moved to New York City, right? That half your family or most of your family is now not in the place where you were born and raised, but somewhere else. Does place still mean, in that case, Mustang, or does it mean where people from Mustang now are, right? These are some of the kinds of questions that this project is trying to get at. Also, questions about care, right? Money is care. Sending money, right, is a way of caring for people, but being present, cooking food, making sure that people can get to hospital if they need to get to hospital, right? All of these things are dynamics of care that are complicated for people who are living what I like to call translocal lives to navigate. And these are also some of the kinds of questions that this project is asking. So the picture that you're looking at right now is an older man from the Patan region in Mustang holding up a picture of him and relatives, right, children, who are all now away, right? All living in New York. And so, again, how do the folks in the picture hold the person who's holding them, right? This is also part of the dynamics that this project is looking at. I am not a demographer. Jeff is a demographer, but we have the good fortune of working together in a really synergistic way on this project to try to also think quantitatively about these social and demographic changes. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, and it's sort of hard to see, but basically what this slide is showing, and this is from 2021 census data in Nepal. So we also know that the census data is not perfect. It's not complete, and it's now also 3 years old. But what we can see in this picture, this is Upper Mustang down in the lower left-hand corner. Mustang district up above, the Patan region, lower Mustang in the upper right-hand corner, and then Tsum and Nubri as comparison down here. Essentially what this shows is that there is an absolutely huge percentage of young people or working age people from their 40s down to their teens in Upper Mustang who are out of Upper Mustang. And that the age pyramid also is heavily geared toward the elders, right? So who is left in villages in Upper Mustang? Not exclusively, of course, but principally it's people who are older. And the data that you're looking at here also for Lower Mustang is both true and not true, in the sense that people from the Patan region of Mustang have been migrating out also for quite a significant amount of time. And there has been already a lot of in-migration from other parts of Nepal, from Dhoka, from Rukum Ropa, many of the sheep herders from that are now in the Badagang region are from places like Rukum and Ropa. So the demography doesn't really show the whole story, but what I can say is that there are significant waves of out-migration, especially of young people, both for school but also for work, that are even captured in imperfect data like the Nepal census. And Jeff and I are working on a paper, also with some of our collaborators in the room, that kind of documents these changes. But just to say that this is the context, right? That people from Upper Mustang and from the Badagang region have been leaving that region for school and for work for quite some time. But the whole demographic picture is really now geared toward those who are elder. We're using a lot of different research methods in this project. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on all of this, but I will just say that we are in the fortunate position of having been documenting household demographic data, both in Nubri and Tsum and especially in Lo, especially in Upper Mustang, since 2012, with sort of punctuated data collection points from another project that was related to women's reproductive histories and culturally Tibetan people's adaptation to altitude. So different project, but still we were gathering household demographic data. So we have it from 2012, 2019, and 2023. So we can also see and track household demographic changes over time. So in 2012, for example, how many people were out of the house in the USA or in Pokhara or in Kathmandu? And in 2024, how much has that changed, right? This is part of what we're looking at. We're also doing structured interviews with a range of people, participant observation. We hope to, in the next year or two, begin family-based case studies, so really looking at sort of different dynamics of care in a deeper way than we're doing just with the surveys right now. And we're also doing a range of focus groups and small group interviews. And I'm going to spend a good amount of time on this question of using pilgrimage and working with the dynamics of pilgrimage as a way of learning about elders' experiences as an ethnographic method, but also as a way to engage elders in conversations and experiences that matter to them and that bring a certain kind of benefit to them, as a way of thinking about the questions that this project is also trying to ask. So just to give you a little bit more idea, these are some of the kinds of questions we're asking folks. We're asking about seasonal and annual migrations, so from the mountains to the city and back again. We're asking about who is helping older people, both financially but also in a day-to-day way. If you can no longer go to the bathroom yourself, who helps you, right? These are some of the kinds of questions we're asking. But also kind of deeper questions like, how do you know when you're old, right? What makes you say, oh, okay, now I'm old? Is it that I've crossed 60? Is it that I can, that my knees really hurt? Is it that, I've experienced a tarchang or a retirement ceremony in the tradition that is most common in the Badagang region? What makes you feel like you've crossed to that line, right? And other kind of, again, more contemplative questions that relate to Buddhism and to religious practice. Things like, what is your understanding of the Tibetan word mitakpa, or impermanence? Some people, when asked that question, are really shy to answer it. They say, oh no, that's a religious question. I don't know, I can't really answer. But I'm going to practice religion in these ways, and that's part of what's important about being an elder person. But other people have lots to say about what impermanence is, how that relates to one's own karma, how that relates to what it means to try to prepare for the next life. And these are also questions that are taken very seriously by the individuals that we're talking to for this project. Participant observation, as we anthropologists in the room know, this is deep hanging out. This is getting a chance to spend time in an unstructured way with folks and listen to what's coming up for them. for me in this project, you know, it's an opportunity to see where and how questions about elder care come up in the sort of circumstances of everyday life, and the ways that people are spending their time, and also spending their resources. Thinking about things like how they're navigating responsibilities of, let's say, school fees on the one hand, and making sure that elders are taken care of, or being able to go, let's say, on an annual pilgrimage on the other. One thing we're also doing, or have experimented with once, and I hope that this will continue in some ways, is to talk to young people who are not growing up in Mustang, but who are connected to and from Mustang. So one of my collaborators, again, Tashi is in the room, did a really wonderful focus group recently with young people from Mustang now living in New York. And these were the kinds of questions or kinds of themes that we were looking at. And you know, one of the interesting things about this focus group is that all of the young people who were part of this had been to Nepal at least once since they migrated to the US. Many of them had experienced different forms of being cared for by their grandparents at certain younger points of their life. But they also had a real range of what I think Tashi wisely called confidence, or a level of being confident in their own cultural or religious and linguistic backgrounds as it relates to their connection to their elders. And this, again, is part of what this project, I think, is trying to get at, sort of how are intergenerational connections or disconnections occurring, and what are people doing with that knowledge. One of the interesting things that kind of came out of this focus group was this kind of getting through a kind of level of superficial connection with elders into something a little bit more deep, and how some of these young people were doing that, or were hoping for that but not achieving that with their grandparents or other elders. So this is, we could do a whole talk on this, but just to say that this is sort of one piece of what we've been doing. As part of what I'm going to talk about in a little more depth in a second, the pilgrimage that we just completed, like literally 2 days ago. So this is all very, very fresh. But one of the things we also did in the context of the pilgrimage is sitting down and doing a few small paired formal interviews with these questions. And I think the one that I would call attention to is the second one. What differences do you see between your generation as elders, right, and your parents' generation as elders? And the answers were so diverse and really, really interesting. Some of the folks were very clear, you know, we have it easier. The life is so much better now. Lifespan is longer. We have so many more facilities. And yet others were very reflective about the fact that although their parents might have had a much harder physical life, that the kind of social coherence that they lived with and lived through is something that this generation doesn't have, or doesn't have in quite the same way, and sorely misses. And so again, what it means to be an elder person now and a generation or two ago, again, continues to be, if not contested, then diverse in its understanding and an ongoing set of questions. So now I want to spend a little bit of time on what we just did, which was to, again, think about pilgrimage as a way of engaging in an ethnographic project that also had sort of direct, concrete meaning to the people that we were engaged with. And I put up here some of the things I think that this method got at. We had 8 elder people with us for this pilgrimage, and 4, essentially me, 3 other collaborators, one of whom is a nurse from Dhoka originally, but who has spent a lot of time in Mustang. And then we also had a monk with us, a lama, and this made up this group. And I will say that I was really glad that the ratio of elder people to helper people was 2 to 1. Because part of what we learned through this process is, again, the embodied sense of care. Just how much effort and energy it takes to make sure that elders are being really clearly cared for, hands held going up and down stairs, right? Making sure that their physical and emotional needs were being met over the course of a rather demanding physical journey down from Mustang to Kathmandu and back. The people that we chose to invite on this pilgrimage also were folks who, for the most part, did not have the family resources or otherwise the capacity to do this kind of trip to Kathmandu on their own. And that was also part of the method, right? Many people do go on pilgrimage to Kathmandu, to other places. Many people from Upper Mustang right now are in Lumbini, for example, for an important religious event. But not everybody has the time, the money, or the support to do this. And so we wanted to choose people for whom this would be a rather special experience, and an experience that they might not otherwise have had. In good anthropological fashion, this was also a rite of passage, right? Collecting everybody up together was a sort of separation from normal life. The week that we spent together doing Nekor, doing pilgrimage, was a liminal state, a state in between normal life, everyday life, and what comes after such a ritual. And then there was, of course, the process of return. And so let me just briefly walk you through some pictures what this meant and what this looked like. So my research collaborators and I went up to Mustang with already a lot of pre-work to ask people if they wanted to participate. Yongdong, who's in the audience, did a ton of this work trying to gather up an appropriate group of elder people to reassure their family members that indeed they would be well taken care of, to explain why this is something that we were wanting to do, and then to actually do the thing of gathering everybody up into 3 jeeps and leaving Mustang, right, for Kathmandu. And so the pictures that you see here, one is an older Ibi or grandma basically turning around to say goodbye to her village, to recognize that as in the past, you never know what will happen on pilgrimage. You may or may not come back. You don't know the outcome of leaving home. So you better leave home with a prayer, with a sense of looking backwards, such that you can hope to return again. And this is what she was doing here. The woman in the middle, again, preparing to leave, and the woman on the right-hand side offering a prayer up toward the snow mountain where there's a Guru Rinpoche or a Padma Tsambhava sacred site, or Ne, sort of marking the beginning of the pilgrimage by noticing things that were changing, the landscape changing, and the sacred geographies along the way. Well, the Ibi on the left here actually leads to the next sort of theme, which is that not everybody made it. She actually got so car sick very quickly that we needed to make very strategic, careful, caring decisions about sending her home. She was super disappointed, but she was super embarrassed, and the sort of dynamics around failing to be able to do this at this stage in her life was also something that was both very instructive, but also very moving and challenging to deal with, right? She got home safely, everything was fine, but again, it reminds us that to be an older person and to navigate moving between the mountains and the city, let alone between Nepal and America, is a really big deal. It's not easy, physically, emotionally, or any of the above. So we had obstacles, as any good pilgrimage does. We had obstacles along the way. But we also had many wonderful adventures, including the picture on the right is people from Mustang meeting a group of people from Lhasa, from Tibet, who we randomly ran into at a tea shop. And again, it was one of these moments of delightful cultural exchange that wouldn't have occurred under other circumstances. And it was an opportunity to say, oh, where are you from? I'm from Lo. Lo's next to Dolpo, and to sort of reconnect a social and religious and cultural geography that complicates the contemporary borders and the political realities between Nepal and Tibet. And so these kinds of dynamics also unfolded on the road. Once we got down to Kathmandu, again, there were many moments of serendipitous reconnections and different forms of cross-cultural encounters. So we were in Bhaktapur, and not all of these folks, most of these folks did not speak much Nepali, right? Some of them did, but not all of them. And so navigating sociolinguistic dynamics when, an older grandma from Mustang meets an older Newari woman in Bhaktapur, and sort of watching how they are interacting with each other was so fascinating, and a really beautiful example also of the ways that that cross-cultural encounter, mutual understanding, mutual respect can also occur so beautifully in this kind of context. Walking Kora, doing circumambulation at Boda, people, hugged each other and kind of burst into tears thinking, oh, I thought I was never going to see you again, and here you are, right? So these kinds of random encounters also were a really beautiful part of this adventure. The picture on the right is a picture of one of the grandmas talking to my host, and someone I consider a host father here in Mustang. His kids are in the audience. He's the hereditary Lama of Muktinath. And so for someone who is from a village in the Muktinath Valley, but who rarely gets to see Tsampa Angil, it was a real joy to have a moment to stay at his home, to connect with him, and to also hear stories about the history of Mustang that might not have otherwise been voiced. Some people were here for the very first time. Can you imagine what it would be like for someone, again, in their 70s, most people were in their 70s and 80s, to arrive in Kathmandu for the very first time? And part of what we got to do is sort of witness that exposure, the delight, the overwhelm, and the ways that people were encountering this thing called Nepal, and in a very different sense. The one person who had never been to Kathmandu before was actually from Dhoka, so he's an internal migrant to Mustang from Dhoka. But some of the elder women from Mustang had not been to Kathmandu in 20, 30, 40 years, and the last time they came, they walked. So imagine, again, the kind of time-space compression, the sense of what this country is, what this place is, what this landscape is, the relationship between agriculture and urban development. All of these kinds of things were like a running conversation through this pilgrimage. But it was also, of course, about the things that pilgrimage is about darshan, about acts of devotion, about different forms of connection to place. So we went, of course, to Boda and to Swayambhu, but we also went to places like Namabuddha, to Parping, or Yanglashin in Tibetan, places where Guru Rinpoche was enlightened. A number of other spots throughout the Kathmandu Valley. The Red Tara, the self-emanating Red Tara in Bhaktapur, up to the Sleeping Vishnu in Buddha Nilkanta. Again, places that have really interesting religious histories for folks from places like Mustang. But again, getting the opportunity to see these spots and to visit these spots in real life is very different than knowing about them in the abstract. So we spent a lot of time making offerings, gathering up chinlab or different forms of blessing. Again, the physical stuff of pilgrimage, sacred water, flowers that had been given as offering to statues that were then taken and will be taken home as precious objects, right? At the same time, also physically moving through Payu, or one of the words that culturally Tibetan people use for this place called Kathmandu, moving through the sacred geographies of this place, and at the same time hearing the stories and the histories. But one of the other important parts of this event was also engaging in what I think is really reasonable to call experiential education. This was the reason we brought a lama, a monk, with us, so that folks were not only engaging in kind of the forms of religious practice that come more naturally perhaps to them, or that are more familiar, like, again, devotional forms, lighting a butter lamp, taking chinlap, taking blessing, putting your head onto sacred objects. Those are all sort of familiar things to this group of elder people, but having an opportunity to sit and listen to somebody in their own language, in their own dialect, talk through the history of a place like Namabuddha was a very different kind of learning experience for them. And so, or again, being able to touch, this is a shapche, a self-emanating hand of Guru Rinpoche at Parping, at Yanglashen, and being able to physically touch places like that were a really important part of this experience. So there were many different parts of this pilgrimage that brought a lot of deep ethnographic knowledge, but also direct senses of benefit in a way that is different, I would argue, than some of the ways that we might engage in other forms of ethnographic research. This was completely an experiment, but I think it was a successful one. Many people talked about the idea of this being an opportunity to earn merit, sonam, and to have something very practically beneficial toward this life, but also hopefully toward future lives in the process of engaging in this work. And yet, again, part of what the benefits and the sort of merit-making dynamic was here was also, again, the intergenerational connections and the dynamics of care. Being able to do things like help carry bags and talk to people about what was hurting them that day and how we might ameliorate that. Making sure that people had food that they really liked to eat. Treating people well, basically. And in that process, trying to learn about the daily struggles that they have in getting their care needs met and the ways that their family or their broader community can or can't meet those needs. So this was a special opportunity, but it was also a way to reflect on the dynamics of everyday life. We spent about 50 hours, I spent about 50 hours in the Jeep over this last 2-week period, in part because we took everybody back, so it was door-to-door service. We took everybody back home to make sure that they were home safely and greeted by their relatives who were in the village. So in the last few minutes that I have here before we talk a bit more openly and take questions, I want to try to distill some of the themes that came out through the pilgrimage, but that have also been coming out through some of the other research we've been doing. And these preliminary themes go back to a pilot study that Yungdong was instrumental in doing in the summer of 2023, but leading through the present and the current data collection. So the first and perhaps the biggest one is this dynamic relationship between different forms of labor, different types of kin connections, and what care means. So in a context in which so many people have gone abroad or come to the city, money, of course, is a wonderful currency for care. It's an important currency for care. There is no question about it. Being able to support people to pay their rent for the winter when they come down to Kathmandu to escape the cold of Lo is real care. And that money and that labor is taking place in New York City, right? As one example. And yet, as these kind of summary quotes, these are all, the stuff in italics are all coming from interviews or other conversations that have come from many people that we've been talking to, recurring themes. Sending money is not the same as having people. We also know that to be true, right? And the dynamics of trying to find caregivers here in Kathmandu is, again, I don't have to tell this room, is challenging to say the least. And so trying to make sure that if your parents are here and you are abroad, that you can rely on the caregiver that you've entrusted with your mom or your dad or your uncle who helped to raise you. You cannot swallow remittances. Also very true, right? And this one came out during the pilgrimage. You can buy everything, but you can't buy your parents, right? Thinking about the dynamics between what money can and can't accomplish in this complicated dynamic of care is also a really deep and enduring theme that's coming out of this research. Another big one is about the road. And about the benefits and the challenges of mobility. the road in Mustang has, of course, transformed the place in many ways, and it is both a blessing and a burden. There's no question. It has made life easier. It has made life possible. It has made return possible. It has made new forms of economic earning possible. And yet it also is not an easy thing. As we saw with Ibi Dekyom, who had to be sent home, the road is not a friendly place for a lot of elders. So the idea that you can somehow easily move as you get older between city and country is also kind of a myth that some of this work is starting to undo or to complicate a bit. Because initially folks were really keen on the idea of, oh, well, I'll spend the summer in Mustang, I'll spend the winter in Kathmandu, and it'll all be fine. For many people that is true, but as people continue to age, that might become less and less true, right? Social isolation. We all know that loneliness is a huge problem across the world, for older people, for younger people, but one of the dynamics that this work is navigating and documenting is how people are trying to fight against forms of social isolation and some of the challenges to that. So absolutely the understanding that being together as a community, whatever that might mean, is important. But that how that happens and where that happens is complicated. Actually several of the folks on the pilgrimage with us repeatedly said a version of this second thing. The city is great if you have money, but otherwise the village is a better place to be. And then also, again, coming from some of the work we're doing in New York or with elders who are considering, or their families are considering moving them to New York, this question of different forms of isolation that come from being in different places. There's one form of isolation if you are, let's say, living in Tinchuli on your own with a caregiver, a Tamang young woman who's your caregiver, and you're having to worry about whether or not she's going to leave herself, you know, next week or next month and not be present for you, or if you're the kids of that elder woman trying to make sure that your family, that your mother is okay. That's one kind of isolation. And yet another kind of isolation might come from staying in an apartment or a house in New Jersey for 12 hours a day where your kids are at work, and you either don't have the confidence or yet the connection to navigate hooking up with other friends from your community, from a similar part of Mustang that might live, an hour train ride away. That train ride is, it could be going to the moon and back because you can't do it yourself, right? So how communities are sort of navigating these questions of isolation are also part of the themes that are coming out. The family, the two people on the right, I wanted to show this picture because this is a man who was an early migrant from Upper Mustang to New York City who chose to come back and built a house, which is the house that he's sitting in now, and chose to come back in great part because he wanted to be an old person here rather than be an old person there. And that again has to do with the kind of question of, what forms of social community against social isolation do you want to try to propagate for yourself? Of course, navigating ill health and disability is a huge theme of this work. How could it not be? Older people, all of us suffer from physical and sometimes mental and emotional ailments, but it's a one-way trajectory for all of us, right, toward a life that is probably more difficult to physically navigate than less. I think this is the most beautiful quote, right? The human body is a rented room for us. The kinds of themes, though, that people are talking about in relation to navigating ill health and disability vary a lot, depending, of course, on where people are. So elders who are actually ending up in New York City, for the most part, not exclusively, but many of them are ending up there because there is I would say, we'll see what happens with Trump, but both a myth and a reality that healthcare in America, Medicare, Medicaid, is more reliable and more consistently available and cheaper than the healthcare that you have to rely on as an elder person here in Kathmandu, for example, or in Pokhara. And yet, there are other trade-offs with choosing to go to New York, the greater New York area, principally for healthcare reasons as an older person. So again, some of these are the dynamics that are coming out. Another one that is kind of a side question in a way to the issues around elder care directly, but also in other ways quite on point, is how and what a village is at this point in a place like Mustang in terms of things like community governments, ritual practice, and how the state of Nepal is supporting its elders. So some of the questions we're asking about and learning about is the deployment of old age pensions, as well as things like widow pensions in places like Mustang as compared to places like Nubri and Tsum. So far, what I think we're learning is that people in Mustang are getting state support a lot more than people in Nubri and Tsum. And that's an interesting finding, right? Why is that? How might that change over time? How does that change the experience of being an older person? What are people using that pension for? Some of the things we're learning is that folks are holding on to their old age pension basically to make sure they have money for their own death rituals. Others are using it for daily life, right? One of the other connections, of course, that's coming out is how the virtual village and the actual village continue to relate to each other. Again, specifically for older people. So these are all pictures taken in New York City. This is outside one of the largest Tibetan centers where Mustangis also gather for different important social events. This is inside during a festival this summer, and this is at my Rokmo Dawa or Mitini Dawa's house in Queens. And what you're seeing on the screen is a projection of a video of older people in Mustang doing a ritual practice connected to the ritual practice that is going on here. But it's again, it's like I'm sitting in this living room and I don't know which place I'm in. Am I in New York? Not fully. Am I in Mustang? Yes, sort of, but not fully. And this idea of connections through digital media, connections through cell phones are absolutely crucial pieces of technology for older people who may not also be literate, but who are really dependent on especially those in New York, but not exclusively, the capacity to kind of tune in and connect with places and people that are important to them in a virtual way. Many people spend a lot of hours of their day while folks in their family might be at work, watching videos that are connecting them back to people in Mustang or to people in Kathmandu. This question of what aging in place means, again, surfaces as place continues to transform. So this is a sentiment that is shared by many people, but here is sort of being voiced by one person, Tashi's mom, who goes routinely to a place called Lincoln Park in New Jersey to do a version of Kora, a version of circumambulation, listening to prayers on her phone, having her prayer beads. But of course she's not at Boda, she's in New Jersey. And yet she's trying to recreate the sensibility, the sentiment of what it means to do that very important act every day at the beginning of the day. And this is also part of what this project is capturing. What retirement means, again, is something that I think this project is beginning to surface. There are particular retirement rituals that are done in Himalayan communities. In Mustang, there's a lot of variation. In the Badagang region, again, a tarsang or a liberation beer ritual is done. In Nubri and Tsum, there are others. In Upper Mustang, tarsang is less common. Other versions, especially around when people are turning 80, are done quite a bit. But what it means to retire, again, to be able to let go of labor, to stop working, is a moving target right now. What counts as labor also is continuing to sort of be evaluated and reevaluated. People who remain in the village for all or most of the year are continuing to have to do hard physical labor or hire other people to do it, or also, to a certain extent, work with machinery now that they didn't used to work with, to do things like tend fields or to care for animals. Others end up coming to New York, and it might, on the one hand, look like they're retired, they're getting to relax, they're doing prayers, but they're also doing a lot of childcare, many of them. And so new forms of labor, right, or forms of labor that might have historically happened, but that are happening in novel forms through migration. And as a sort of way to start to wrap this up, you know, obviously, perhaps, but in many multifarious ways, questions of impermanence, questions of death, questions about you know, the uncertain futures are front and center in the conversations that we're having about Asia, about aging. I'm worried about how I will die, whether in happiness or sorrow. That might not be a new sentiment, right? But worrying about it in the context of where your children are or will be, where you most want to be when you die, and why. These are things that are very much continuing to change and to unfold. More and more folks from Mustang, for example, are actually dying in places like Pokhara and Kathmandu, even though where they might want to die is the village. And there are lots of different reasons for that. Connected to this has been, you know, a theme that I'm going to continue to sort of track over time, and we're thinking carefully about, but that is a kind of what I've called here a ramping up of religious practice. And I'm just about done. You know, an increase not only in kind of devotional forms of practice, but also serious attention to religious texts and to going to Buddhist teachings and becoming literate in Tibetan. These are things that the older generation are now engaging in rather new ways. And this leads to basically a concept that I'm trying to think with in this project, which is about this idea of inner and outer architectures. In a way, this concept comes, Sonam, from thinking about you and your work. Sonam is an architect and an engineer from Tsum, and one of the nascent parts of this project came from thinking about things like the houses in places like Tsum and how, or Mustang, and how ill-equipped they were to have older people living in them on their own, right? Being able to go up and down ladders or not have an inside toilet, or, you know, all of these things that when you live in an intergenerational family, you can deal with because there are people there to help. But when that family has dispersed, what do the outer architectures become? How do you have to change how you live, where you live, in order to continue to age well? But it's also about what's inside, right? The inner architectures of your mun, your sem, and how you make peace with this stage of life. And these are, again, themes that I'm really continuing, we're all involved in this project, continuing to think about. And so finally, what are the possible futures? One of the things that continues to come up is this question of, as I put it here, to Gensukang or not to Gensukang. Gensukang in Tibetan means old age home, or, you know, elder care facility. And there are a lot of debates, I would say, and different opinions about whether or not one of the solutions to elder care for folks in Mustang or folks in Nubri and Tsum is to create kind of institutional settings in which families can deposit their elders safely and know that they will be cared for. Many, many different questions about whether or not that's a good idea, where they should happen, why they might be good or bad, what you should call them. Many folks are saying, oh, fine, we'll make something like that, but don't call it a Gensukang, call it a Tsamkang, which means a retreat house, so that it can have a kind of religious connotation to it, a sense of merit being earned by being there, and less social stigma. Of course, social stigma around old age facilities exists across the world, as do the necessity for them. So another question, or, you know, constant conversation is, okay, well, maybe we should we've had daycares for young people, maybe now we need elder daycares that are going to help to solve some of the problems of care in our communities. There's also this sort of question that continues to turn around in people's minds about you know, when I first started asking some of these questions a number of years ago, many people said, oh, well, my ideal is to spend 3 months of the year in New York, 3 months of the year in Kathmandu, and 3 months of the year in the village in the summer when it's wonderful, right? That sounds lovely, but it's also really expensive, it's impractical, it's challenging physically for people to move that much as they age, and yet seasonal migrations, especially between Mustang and Kathmandu or Mustang and Pokhara, remain. And so, and yet they're not without their costs, physically as well as financially. So people continue to think about this. And quite seriously, and this is also something I would probably extend to Nubri and Tsum, but in a different way, there are these really deep existential questions that are being asked about, you know, will Mustang have people from Mustang in it in 20, 30 years? And if so, who will be there? And if not, who will be there? And what is that dynamic going to be like? And how does that relate to what this elder generation right now is thinking about in terms of what successful aging might mean for them? So with that, I'm going to stop talking and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Very insightful research, and I think it has helped us think and rethink our own understanding and our own experience. I especially liked your innovative research methods you used in your research. I'm sure people in the audience have so many questions, so let's open the floor. Please raise your hand, and we'll take a couple of questions in a round. Please identify yourself and be brief. There will be microphone around.
This is Yuras from National Institute on Aging and Health. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. And basically, I was quite wondering how difficult it was to get the information from the older adult people during the discussion period. So this points.
Nitaji.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Nita Sainju-Pradhan, and I'm affiliated with the AMHS Kathmandu Center. I was just curious whether you were also, or you are also planning on getting the perspectives of the younger generation in terms of how they feel, you know, their elders are going to be retiring, or where, or what, and how.
Hello, I'm Salish from Patan, New York. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to know is like how the elders was connecting with the young generation with their old stories, oral stories.
Great. Yeah, well, I would actually like to invite the folks in the audience who are also really part of this project to think about answering some of those questions. I mean, I don't know, Yongdong, if you have things to say, Kunzun Sakti, if you have things to say, but part of the point of the whole project is actually this intergenerational link, right? Having younger researchers you know, a different generation of folks, not just talking to their own parents or grandparents, but talking to other people of a different generation. That's absolutely part of the point of this. I think, you know, how difficult it is to get information, I think that has everything to do with the trust and rapport of the people who are part of this project and their family connections and their capacity to speak directly to people in their own dialect in ways that make sense to the elder generation. And you know, I'm a piece of that, but I'm one small piece of a mosaic of conversations that are happening. So yeah, I would invite anybody who's here who is part of this to also offer your own thoughts about these very good questions. Yeah, Yungdala.
I'm living in Taiwan. So I was the part of this research since 2023, and my experience so far is really good. Getting to know many of the old people, and there was one question regarding how we approach people and ask questions, right? So I have experience of doing research from last 2014 for short term and now longer term. So how I approach is I have been involved with different work. So some of the people know me as Mustangi or Baragumba, as I'm from the Baragaon area. Also, some of the people know me because of our intergenerational relations, right? So because of that, I approach them and ask them whether they are available in the house and explain them what is the process and are you willing to participate, right? So, and as we begin our conversation, we have set of questions, getting their permissions, and at the end also, if they are willing, also taking pictures. So through those process, we do the research. Yeah, I will try to keep it short. Thank you.
I think one of the things, Yongdong, that you said that is really true is that, and this relates to the last book I wrote called The Ends of Kinship, but everything is kinship, right? Everything is social connection. And so you're never just a single person. And so the capacity of the research collaborators on this project to be able to locate themselves in this and in relation to the elders that they're talking to is absolutely crucial. Oh, you are the second cousin of this person who is married to that person. Those conversations are the ways that trust and understanding is built, right? And it's not like those relationships are always smooth or easy or without conflict or uncomplicated, but it locates people in relation to each other, and from there stories come, right? Including stories that relate to how things were different a past generation ago and are now, and where people in the family are. So yeah, kinship is kind of everything too.
Again, other question? Satish Dinesh first, please, and then.
Thank you, Sienna. That was wonderful. I thought Mustang is kind of an exception, from Nepal, far away, particular story. But the way you presented is the story of every village in Nepal. Actually, I would present it exactly the same way about my own village in Ramsar district, which is other side of Nepal. So this is kind of interesting. It's a common theme emerging. Is a biggest, I don't know whether it's a disaster or a good thing or a bad thing, but it is happening. You said that Mustangis in New York are living in New York and in Mustang simultaneously, right? Mm-hmm. Don't you think that's a temporary thing? That once this generation is over, the next generation will not do that. So it's just a matter of time. In a few years' time, the story will be different. Right? They may remember, like a lot of Europeans in America say that, my ancestor came from Ireland or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of them will remember that. Mm-hmm. Other than that, what would be the story of those who are not white in America, who migrated and they do not have any direct connection? I'm just wondering, probably it's not your research question, but this simultaneous living in two places is really powerful. And a lot of people, young people in America that I talk to, one thing they always say is that I think I'll go back to Nepal. The only one reason is I have to take care of my parents. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this generation still thinks that they have to go back to Nepal for that reason. The only one reason that drives them out. And one person even said to me that, a few weeks ago, I hope Trump will kick us all out so that we don't have to think twice, because I can just go that way. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, so I was just having this very conversation with Selma this morning about, you know, what one or two generations from now might be like. I think a singular narrative or a single story on that is not good, right? I think it will continue to be a complicated story for some time, but for all the reasons, both, you know, we have no idea what Trump is going to do, to the kind of individual connections that exist within families. This was something that came out very strongly in the focus group that Tashi did recently in New York. Like, there was so much diversity within that room of 14 or 15 young people between the ages of 14 and 24 about, you know, their own sense of sociolinguistic competency, their own sense of tie to Nepal or not, or Mustang or not. But, I mean, I do think that the question of 2 or 3 generations from now, what this all looks like, is you know, I resist just saying sad because it's way more complicated than that. But there's a lot of loss, right? And there's a lot of deep change. And of course, we will live through it. People will live through it and continue to be vibrant in their expression of culture in whatever form that is, right? But I think when you combine that with the problems and the real challenges, direct challenges of climate change in a place like Mustang, it gets very complicated to think about. I didn't talk about climate change at all, right? But this is something that clearly is a theme that is, you know, being talked about by everybody and experienced directly by everybody. So what do you go back to, right? Do you go back to a village that no longer has water, right? You know, Amshi Tenzindake, who's here, his village has had to shift because of the lack of water, right? Already in our lifetimes. So New York might not have water either, but, you know.
Thank you for your presentation. Given that many of us who do social science research and writing don't write poetry or fiction as you do,
Yeah.
so are you and your planning and your collaborators planning to read a lot of fiction or poetry in Nepal's languages that might illuminate aspects of your project? So that's question 1. Question 2, in the kind of research team you have gathered, there are lots of collaborators who are variously Nepalis.
Yes.
So when does research begin for them? So as you were talking, I was thinking about you know, why I need to go back home at 5:15
Yeah.
because of a guy is coming to give a flu shot to my mother at 5:30. Right?
Yeah.
And so if I were to be your collaborator in this project, when would research begin for me?
Yesterday.
No, seriously.
Yeah, no, I think, so Pratyushi, great questions. I would love to think about ways to engage more as we especially start to gather and kind of try to start to distill some of what we're learning, to engage with Nepali literature and themes on this subject. It's not something that I have really thought about yet. We're still very much at the beginning of the project, but I think it's a wonderful suggestion because I think there's so much there. Also in Tibetan, there's a great deal. And then in people writing, you know, I'm thinking about contemporary Tibetan writers who also have roots in Nepal, whose whole opus, you know, whose whole body of work reflects these kinds of themes. People like Tsering Modonpa, for example. So. I hope we continue to take inspiration from a lot of these other sources. Also related to pilgrimage, I mean, I think if we continue this dynamic idea of using pilgrimage as both a practical benefit of engagement with the work, but also an ethnographic method, that you know, Naik or pilgrimage texts in Tibetan will also be a really interesting thing to look at and to think about as it relates to the experiences of folks going to these places. So not just sort of oral experiential education like we had on this trip, but going more deeply into textual history that might connect. And the question of where does research begin or end, I mean, I think it's a really serious one, it's a really deep one, and it's also one that has a kind of lightness and fluidity to it, as your comment about your mom reveals. I think that in many ways, everybody involved in this project at some level is living these questions, right? There's not an easy or simple separation from what we're learning about in a research mode and what folks are having the kinds of conversations that they're having with people every day. And yet I think, as Yongdong kind of said, one of the things that this project, I hope, is helping to do is to break out or to branch out from just thinking about these kinds of problems and dynamics in one's own family to seeing comparatively within a community how different people are experiencing these questions of aging and care. But even for me, who I am not Mustangim, I have my own elders to worry about, but even for me, kind of navigating what's going on in the intimate lives of the people I'm closest to here is very difficult to separate from, this is research, right? Yeah.
Other question?
Thank you. Thank you. It was very interesting presentation. Well, it can also updated me, since I was academically disconnected since last 10 years with Mustang, although I did my master and PhD fellow there. My name is Dilip Paudel and I'm affiliated with the Southeast Institute of Advanced Studies. I'm a geographer by training. My questions is related to land. Well, Mustangi, they are kind of, they have their own society with Mukhya and Thuini, in Baragaon especially, and the very much connected with land and culture, and they do not prefer to sell land to outsiders usually. So, in your study, you might have lots of information about that. How comfortable are they to sell land outside, or how they prefer to welcome migrant and be a part of Mukhya society, Thuini society? That's the question.
It's a complicated question.
Very complicated.
Many people in this room are way more qualified to answer it than me. I will just say that.
Well, I was just quickly curious. It is very complicated, I know, but still, if there's something new change in the cultural practice there.
Well, I would again invite those in the room who have knowledge that they might want to share or concepts that they might want to talk about in relation to this question to do so. The one thing I would say is that I am really interested in the dynamics of internal migration that I'm learning about in relation to these questions of land and what land is for, right? Because right now, again, Sewang and I were just talking about a dynamic this morning where in Lomantang, right, most of the houses are locked up, and it feels kind of quiet and almost a little bit dead inside, whereas it used to feel very vibrant, right? People are living on the outside of the wall in hotels, or they're somewhere else, with few exceptions, right? And yet, the dynamic around, let's say, Dhoka people moving into other parts of Mustang, paying rent, or in some cases even buying land, is connected to the idea that the house needs to be occupied at some level. The land needs to be used, right? And so, again, there's not one story about how people across Mustang are handling the question of land, but again, anybody else want to talk about this? It's a complicated dynamic, also related to citizenship elsewhere. Yeah, Kunzum.
I'll answer it.
Yeah, good.
My name is Kunzum. I've been working with Sienna for the last, how many years? We're officially working since 2012, yes.
Unofficially, 30 years of
30
friendship.
years, yes. For your questions, what I think, since 2012, what I've been observing is, now they're starting selling the lands to other not so common. There still holds on it, but there is move on it. So those people who moved from Dhoka migrated to Mustang, Baragong area especially, like Kakbeni, Purang, Putak, and then Tsum. Those areas, they've been selling it. Especially those people who moved out of the village. If they want to keep somebody to look after their land, they have to pay, instead of renting, they have to pay them. So now they're selling it. So they're buying it. Not so many, but it's going on. And even in Upper Mustang, I think they're already selling land for the outsiders. So it's not so difficult now. There used to be a rule in my village, Jaipur, that we are not allowed to sell land to outsiders. Somebody bought it last 3 years ago now, one person. The guy who worked there made money right there in Jaipur, so he bought a land, he's building a hotel right now. So it's moving on. So even in Mukinath, a lot of people sold their land. There are a huge hotel in Ranikoa. So there are private students like outsiders, not just local. Not yet. Not yet. But they still have, I don't know, in the next few years what's happened, but they're not part of the Mukya, or they do have to do the village work though. Yeah, they do have to do the village work.
Yeah, let us take other round of questions.
Go ahead.
I'm from Lubra in Mustang. Maybe many people have heard or maybe not. It's a small village. So land question is very, very complicated. So I want to raise a question here, because when we are talking about giving land to people in my village, we are suffering because of no land. Because our land are being taken by the flood, right? And then question comes, are we compensated by the government, our land? No. And can we settle in a new place, and will we have a right for that? So that will be another research question that we can explore together. Yeah.
Let us take other round of questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Jing. I'm doing my PhD in anthropology from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm really fascinated by what you mentioned about pilgrimage as ethnographic method, and I'm thinking it really brings like a lot of new dynamics than like participant observation we conventionally think about. Like maybe you kind of like more spontaneous, more kind of you wait and sit back to see what is going to happen. So I'm just curious about some kind of discussions or behind the scenes stories of how this method came into being, what kind of discussions or debates you might have had within the team. I'm thinking maybe there are like also options of following a team who are going to Kathmandu or to Boulder, like to do kind of traditional type of participant observation rather than organizing a trip yourself. So yeah, I'm just really curious about how this method came into being and how that make you think of participant observation or fieldwork method in China.
It's a really good question. So the first way I will answer it is to say that both have generated really fruitful learning of slightly different sorts. The idea about this pilgrimage came from a conversation that Kunzum and I had many years ago now. Both of us sort of sitting there thinking about these dynamics and also about the social inequality, quite frankly, that exists in places like Mustang, and that some people get to do this really important thing and other people don't. And so talking about that dynamic with each other, thinking about what we would also learn ourselves, but also from elders that we might engage with in this way, thinking it would be fun, but also very seriously that it would be a really concrete way of engaging people in this work that also allows us to get to know them in a different manner than if we were just doing kind of participant observation, either, let's say day to day around Boda or at home in the village. Again, because this idea of pilgrimage as method is also about doing something together, having a collective experience. That's what the rite of passage is, right? We all had to create a sense of community with each other. We had to build quickly social ties with each other, to trust each other, to rely on each other, to make jokes with each other, to eat with each other. All of that creates a different kind of connection, perhaps in a quicker way, even if it's also ephemeral. It ended, right? We had to bring them home, and then maybe we won't see maybe some of the EB that we were with will be passed away by the next time I come back to Nepal. I don't know, right? But it created a kind of microcosm of deep experience that allowed for a form of sharing that is different than the kind of deep sharing that can also happen in a more conventional participant observation mode. If that answers your question.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. I'm Supriya Malan, and I work in educational technology. Earlier in the presentation, there was a part where you mentioned some of these seniors were sort of in the process of learning Tibetan script, familiarizing themselves with those sorts of religious texts, as part of one of the many activities that they're engaged in as they age. I was sort of curious about among the people who were part of this research, there was any sort of collective sentiment around teaching learning, as in, I think it's really encouraging, it's very heartwarming almost to see this idea of senior individuals having this desire to learn, and although I'm sort of looking at it in a more simplified way as education, so teaching themselves scripts and reading books, and of course education is something broader than that. And one could say that even in seeking to overcome social isolation, having bonds with family, communicating, there is an element of teaching learning in there in some way, one could say that. But I'm curious if teaching learning or ideas of pedagogy play some kind of role in this aging process in a more explicit way. Like, for example, one could hypothesize that as you grow older, maybe a sentiment that I need to impart this education to the younger generation before I leave, or something like that. I'm just curious of what sort of ideas you may have encountered along those lines.
Just take another question. So, yeah, first there, gentleman black coat.
Thank you, Sienna, for the wonderful presentation. I am Omnath Chalise. By background, I am social gerontologist. I am affiliated with Geriatric Center, Nepal, also teaching in the Center Department of Population Studies, especially for MPhil and PhD students. My concern is basically I am doing research on quantitative area. I have done many research focusing on what you have talked about success. We did recently one study about successful aging also, but it was purely the quantitative research. We are doing research on quality of life, functional disabilities, loneliness, depression, different aspects. Yeah, I'm wondering about your research. You have focused the Mustang. When we were very small, what we learned about Mustang is quite different from Nepal. It is used to be a separate district than the Nepal. It is behind the hill area. And when you talk about the people of Mustang also, generally, they are the most people who get opportunity to go to abroad compared to other parts of Nepal. So they went to New York and other developed area. And they have homes in Mustang, in Kathmandu and New York. I have also get someone in their area in New York. So the research you are doing in this area, it gives some new information, especially focusing about aging and migration. So how the older people, they perceive when their children are living abroad and they are also getting chance to come to Kathmandu and going to New York. Now how do they perceive? And you have also connected with the death and time. Where do they want to die? And focusing on aging in place. So my concern is you are going to take research on the Mustang area, and so you are basically going to focus those people who get the opportunity to live in New York then, or you are targeting the people who are living only in that particular village only. So you are targeting the people who are living in Kathmandu and as well as New York who get that opportunity. So my concern is that one. Thank you.
Just take other two more questions. There are two hands. Okay, Sonamji also. Last one.
My name is Nubri. I was just wondering, it was under your scope of research not, if you had a chance to see the impact of previous project that was implemented by the government with a number of other donors. You know. I remember I was in Mustang in the early 80s, you know, and I've traveled all the way from Leyte up to Mustang. Some of the projects like LRMP or some of the projects by Nepal was there to improve the livelihood of the people. But despite all this sort of project in the past, people are, as you said, flying away. So if you had a chance to see the impact of those previous projects.
My name is Sonam Rama, and I'm from Tsum, and I'm also, it's my honor to be part of this amazing research. And well, our focus is in North Gorkha and Tsum and Nubri. But still, I would like to ask a very quick question to Sienna. I mean, I really enjoyed the NACOR. Did you ask because we in the Himalayan region, you know, one of the main NACOR is of course Yambu. Yeah. Yambu means the Kathmandu. And the other NACOR is also like the Buddha's, you know, the main places, mostly starting from Lumbini to the Sarnath and all the other places in North India. So my question would be how it was decided. Of course, I can imagine logistic-wise as well. The second question would be, did you encounter any Tsamgang or Kensogang in Mustang? Because last time, you know, when I was in Manang, there was a, first they told me it's Kensogang, and then I visited there, and then, you know, I was asking if you are sending your parents in the old days to this place near the monastery, and they said, no, it's a Tsamgang, this is not Kensogang. So you can feel some sense of the social stigma. But yeah, but also, you know, as a collaborator, I would also like to mention that I had the honor to begin this project, you know, involved in this project from 2021 when I had a Human Pratt Fellowship at MIT. And then I had a chance to work with Sienna Craig and Jeff Child doing a pilot research. So we had a pilot grant, and we used that data for the largest grant, and now we are on this grant. So I'm really looking forward to some of the concepts that are really crucial to our life. For example, Tsewa, parents, children respecting the parents. Yeah. That's really crucial. And then somehow, you know, I was in Europe for 2 years, and then, you know, a few times in US as well. So I can sense the, you know, cultural differences are there. So I'm really looking forward to how, you know, the research result would come out from New York, you know, because we are also conducting research in New York. So
I'm really looking forward to Tashi and you and Jeff as well. But yeah, really enjoyed. Thank you so much.
It was another hand.
So yeah, great presentation, you know. And before I address one of the pedagogy questions, I just wanted to say a few words. So this project, again, Sienna and Jeff are spearheading, but I think this is a combination of Himalayan scholars and scholars from the Himalayas trying to understand a very complex problem. So I think from my experience, this is not particular to Mustang or Gurkha. Maybe the scale or the level of urgency is a little different, but I think this is something we are seeing across the world, not only in Nepal, as Dr. Potter pointed out. I think there's a trend where globalization, moving of people from different geographical position across time and space is becoming more common, and people are navigating this problem in their own ways. And I think it's really interesting, but also important to understand the problem, the nature of the problem, before really talking about solution. The first thing is to understand the problem, and I think that is what you guys are doing. That is what I'm a part of, and I'm really proud about that. And I had wanted to respond to one of the questions about the pedagogy and how that is shaping their lives regularly. And I would like to cite my personal experience where my mother actually goes to Zoom class where a monk from India teaches Tibetan things around 8 p.m. So she rushes to her dinner so she can make it to the class. And if you really look at the technology, the internet, and earlier there was conversation about whether being in Mustang or being in New York, and technology had made it possible for two people to be in two places simultaneously to some extent. Right? So, again, as we talk about how are people post-retirement or in the age to spend their time, I think technology has made their life a lot easier, given them access to things, to opportunities that they didn't have before. So I know that a lot of people are attending Zoom conferences, doing money and all that over the internet, and I think COVID time was a prime time when we noticed that my mother would never be on Zoom, but she was forced to because there was nothing to do. You were stuck home all day. And this is a situation where people are adapting to the new circumstances, but really trying to recreate things that they would like to do over time. Maybe it wasn't possible before. So that's pretty much it. So I think that's an important component, to be honest. And I think it's more common now than before because of technology.
So we are running out of time.
Yes.
There are so many questions, so
Yes.
so many time. Long time. But can you be as brief as possible? Just wrap up in 2 or 3 minutes. We need to also get the.
Yes. Everybody needs to leave and go do other things, like give flu shots to their mother. Yeah. I really, all of these are great questions that I think are worth considering in a longer way. I think Tashi tied into what I might say about the pedagogy question. I think pedagogy is happening lots of different ways, and I'm really interested to continue to learn about how that's playing out in the project. On the question about impacts of development projects in Mustang, I'm not the expert who should answer that question. People in this room, I'm looking at you, Yangchen, as someone who works with a Mustang-based social service NGO that does a lot of work on education and climate change. Other people in this room, Kunzum has done a ton of work on both education and on cultural restoration and heritage. I think those are the folks who need to answer the question, really, of what governmental or large INGOs have done or haven't done for Mustang over the last 30 or 40 years. So that would be a whole other conversation, I think. But an important, very important question to ask because it relates to outmigration also. I think we should just end, yeah? But again, this is a collaborative project. This is an honor to be here together with all of you. And thank you especially to everybody who's a friend and colleague and collaborator from Mustang who's in the room. It really means the world that you're here. So thanks.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. And to wrap up, we have a small token of love from Social Science Baha, and I want to hand over to you on behalf of Social Science Baha and Association for Nepal and North America.